So here is how this is going to work. I think that Jen is going to give us some more perspectives on that. But we will start with a conversation here, some questions. We will talk about the process overall, and then we will open for Q&A. Okay, so get prepared, get your questions ready, and once we warm up here, everybody's going to join the Q&A. Is that right?
Yep, that's right, Michel. Well, thank you both for joining us for this conversation. Simon, I want to start with you. You're a big believer in purpose. Why? What do you see the power of purpose for an organization like ours?
So my love and my focus on purpose had nothing to do with business. It came from my own journey, where I had lost my own passion for my own work. And superficially, my life looked fine and good. I owned my own business, we had good clients, we did good work, but I didn't want to wake up and go to work anymore. And so that was embarrassing, quite frankly. I was embarrassed to admit that I was unhappy when superficially things looked well. And so most of my energy went into pretending that I was happier, more in control, and more successful than I felt, which is not a great place to be. And it wasn't until a dear friend of mine came to me and said, something's wrong, was I able to take all of that energy that I was going into lying, hiding, and faking, and to find a way to restore my passion. And what I discovered was, based on the biology of human decision-making, this little model, why, how, and what. And I realized I knew how I did things and I knew what I did, but I didn't know why. And so the idea of purpose has nothing to do with business. It's a deep-seated human need. Our need to belong is deeply ingrained in us. And if you consider the company as just the modern-day tribe, and the more we feel like we belong to our tribe, and the more that we feel that our company and our work has meaning beyond just the money we make and the product we sell, it actually is incredibly fulfilling and incredibly joyful. And it just so happens it's exceptionally good for business. Organizations that have a clear sense of purpose, use that sense of purpose to make decisions, hire to that sense of purpose, build structure, incentives around that purpose, tend to outperform, tend to out-innovate their competitors over the long term, almost always.
Thank you. And Michel, looking a little bit about why now is the right time, hearing Simon talk about the power of purpose for an organization and what it can bring to the table for our people and how we operate. We've had a couple conversations over the last few years about who we are as a company and where we're going and how we want to be perceived, not just by our employees and our colleagues here, but more broadly by our competitive set and by people outside of the industry. Why was now the right time to tackle this?
So I don't think that there is a right time, but we actually had a great opportunity. And I always had this healthy dissatisfaction with the way that we were communicating our purpose and the way that we were talking to people. And there was this never-ending conflict of people like me that are for more than 20 years in the company, and that we share this passion, admiration, sense of noble mission for doing what we do, and get confronted all the time by people that were joining the company, that were great people, asking us questions of why do we exist, what would the company miss if the ABI would not be here. And I always thought that our answers were sometimes either superficial or they were not really well thought to address the changes in society and the reason why people were asking this question. And it was because they deeply care about this purpose. It was not just a question in the air, but we were trying to give answers that were very shallow. And that thing was inside me growing for years. And I had this conversation with Brit where I said, you cannot keep trying to answer this with averages, the average opinion of everybody. I want to give a try and bring the best people that we can and try to get to an answer to that is massive transformational, that mobilizes people, that brings more smiles than uncertainty, and that people really engage with. And then A lot of people came together. It was super funny. It's even a question that I have for you, by the way. I will link this on the question, because on one of these minutes of insanity, when we were talking about that, I said, I want everybody that knows how to build this, that is really a specialist and is good at that. I want to bring Simon Sinek. And then there was this silence at the table, and people said, what are we talking about? How are you going to bring this guy here? And then I said, yes, I want to bring him. And then I think that we set Marcel on a mission together with Wyden Kennedy, and we start talking to people here and there, and someone found a way. There is always a way to talk to you. And it was super funny because at Prince, at the beginning, people came and said, oh, he's going to join you for like a 30-minute session. But we have to let you know that, one, he doesn't do this job. Two, he doesn't engage on companies, whatever. He talks about the topic, but he's not going to do the work with you. And then I was incredibly frustrated and say, why not? If this guy is the good one, he's going to come here. I said, okay, so give me one meeting with him. Give me the 30 minutes. And I'm sure that we can sell him the passion and bring him along, and he's going to engage and help us. If he does not, we go for the second choice, third choice, we find a way to do this ourselves. And then I was always curious to understand the perspective from your side, because was this group of crazy people talking all together, trying to convince you to join. And I'm so happy and so glad that at the end you helped us, and we continue to engage and talk after all these months.
You make me sound so like I'm hidden away, that they don't let me out of my box. The reason was a long time ago I made a strategic decision that when I realized the power of this little idea, I had some choices to make, right? Where I could build a business around it, become a consultant, make good money, build a consultancy around this idea. That was option number one. And option number two was to become a preacher for a new way of thinking about business, and to work and devote my life to undoing everything that Jack Welch did. And I made a strategic choice that I would preach. And so and my goal was to get to as many people and as many organizations as possible, to spread this message. And so I would often get invitations to come and become a consultant, but what I always viewed it would take me away from spreading the message. Rolling up my sleeves for 2 years to work with one company is amazing, but I'm trying to change the way we think about business. The great news is that the movement is growing. When I first started talking about purpose a bunch of years ago, it was like hippy dippy stuff. You didn't talk about purpose at work. Work was serious, and now I love the fact that major corporations at the highest levels are talking about the power of purpose, because you felt it. You felt like it was superficial. I love that. It's deeply human. You're sort of reinforcing what we said a moment ago, and quite frankly, a lot of companies pay purpose lip service because it's fashionable, right? And so every company has a purpose statement on their website, but the question is do they use that purpose statement to make decisions? Are they using it to build their strategies? And the answer is woefully small. I'll give you one silly example, and I think it's one of the ones I wrote about, which is a pharmacy, for example. If you go to Walgreens, their purpose statement is to help our customers be healthy and something like that, whatever it is. And then you walk through their stores and they sell cigarettes and other really bad things. And if you ask them, why do you do that? They're like, well, the margins are great, It's like, but what about your purpose? In other words, they never meant it. It was never serious. And quite frankly, when we met, I was just blown away by your honesty and your passion, and the fact that you do recognize that there's new ways to run business. I was just completely just drawn to the people, and that you really, really do believe in this stuff. And I find that very attractive. And if you can change the way you do business, you can influence the way other people do business. At the risk of talking for too long, GE back in the day was the leadership factory in the world. that if you had GE on your resume, that was enough to qualify you to go run any other company, you know? Well, that didn't work. You know, many of those executives drilled those companies into the ground. GE is a shadow of its former self, and it wasn't built to last. And no one has replaced GE as the leadership factory for the world. Because the old models, if you think about it, we all came up with the Jack Welch thinking. We all grew up and became executives in that world. And so the talent pool for a new way of thinking of business is zero. And what I find exciting is that there's an amazing opportunity for a large company to reinvent literally how business is done. Just like GE reinvented it for those strange times, my question is why not ABI? Like, why not ABI? That the way that you will imagine purpose, the way that you will imagine leadership, the way that you will run your business will be not based on old thinking, but based on new thinking, and that simply having ABI on your resume qualifies you to be the CEO of absolutely any company in absolutely any industry. No one has replaced GE. My question is, why not you? And that's what drew me to you.
Simon, following on from that, I think we've all had the benefit of hearing Michel talk about our purpose. We dream big to create a future with more cheers, and we've heard the passion in his voice, and we've heard him refer to our purpose specifically as magical. Is that something that you feel is unique to ABI in terms of having a CEO as well as a company and employees that feel so passionately about our purpose?
The simple answer is yes. The simple answer is yes. And I'll refer to the answer I gave a moment ago, which is a lot of the leaders of major public companies came up through the old system. And so, what got me here may not get me there, but the fear of changing what I was raised to believe over a 20 or 30-year career, it's largely fear, because this is what I know. I'm really good at this. I perfected it. Look where it got me. Why would I change? And I think it takes tremendous courage to say, yes, that was great, but what got us here will not get us there. And to challenge oneself and challenge one's company is pretty rare, especially for large public companies.
And so sort of following on to that, I assume, and you can both maybe speak to this, that you both see purpose as a major driver or catalyst for opportunity for a company.
I mean, yes. I mean, the simple answer is yes. I think we all agree, and you and I definitely agree. But I think it's also, if you look at this young generation who's coming up, remember that they grew up in the old model. More important, their parents worked in the old model. And so I hear so many people complain that this young generation shows no loyalty to the company. They're in and out. Well, remember, they watched their parents get laid off because the company missed its arbitrary projections. The company was profitable, just not as profitable as they promised. And so their parents lost their jobs, right? So why should they be loyal to the company? That's what they saw, no loyalty to their parents. And it was not a meritocracy. Their parents were working hard. And so I don't blame them. And so they organically are challenging the old systems because it doesn't feel right. And they're looking for companies to respond to that. And most companies either pay it lip service or just don't. And so I think any company that ignores the changing tides of the world will find themselves playing defense and playing catch-up in a few years as that generation gets older, because they're demanding it. And they're not wrong.
Right.
Thinking through kind of the opportunity here, one of the things that we had talked about when we were creating the purpose statement was that it would be something that was true today, but also would live in through the future. Can you talk about why that's so important for an organization like ours?
So I'm a devotee and complete fanatic for the infinite game and having an infinite mindset. Very quickly, just a quick definition so you know what I'm talking about. Dr. James Carson in the mid-1980s defined these two types of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is known players, fixed rules, and an agreed-upon objective. Football, baseball. There's always a beginning, middle, and an end, and if there's a winner, necessarily there have to be losers. Then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means new players can join any time, and you don't necessarily know who all the other players are. I mean, you definitely don't know every brewery in the world, The rules are changeable, which means every player can play however they want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. Turns out, business is an infinite game. When Circuit City went bankrupt, Best Buy didn't win anything. They had to keep playing. Companies come and go, and yet the game continues with you or without you, and there's no such thing as winning. Nobody wins business. It doesn't exist. But if you listen to the language of too many leaders, it becomes abundantly clear they don't always know the game they're playing in. They talk about being number one, or being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? And I love it when executives come to me and say, we are number one. And I always say, for now, And so the idea of building a company that can survive every single employee in this room after you've long gone, and that company remains true to its purpose, is a very, very powerful thing. A great example is right outside the front door, the Walt Disney Company. The purpose that Disney founded, and they've gone through trials and tribulations for sure, ins and outs. But for the most part, when they are at their natural best, they harken back to their founding purpose, and I love that. You ask me, is it essential? I mean, depends on what kind of company you want to run. If you want a company that can continue to innovate and set the course for what business should look like, define what innovation looks like in your industry long before you're all, long after you're all gone, then build that company. But if you want to build a company that just sucks the life out of people who work there and does damage to the industry all in the name of, it does damage to the communities in which we work all in the name of short-term gains, you can build that company too. It'll come at a much steeper cost in terms of love, loyalty, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. Maybe I'm just a crazy idealist.
So I think, Simon, as far as the infinite game is concerned, and I think, I know we have one zone, for example, that has fully adopted the infinite game, and I imagine we as ABI, knowing Michelle, we want to be infinite players. But we've heard from speakers yesterday and today that have talked about sort of the tension between, needing to meet short-term metrics and having our eye on the long-term strategic objective. And those metrics having everything to do with quarterly earnings, as well as the annual targets that we set for ourselves and we live and die by. So, and this question is both for Michelle as well as for you, Simon. I guess from an ABI perspective, how can we be an infinite player and align that tension so we can still meet our metrics as well as have that sort of long-term growth strategy?
So the infinite game is not the absence of finite games. You can absolutely have arbitrary goals. And remember, most of the financial goals we set, a few people sat in a room and said, what do we want our annual goal to be? And somebody says, let's make it this number. And somebody goes, no, let's make it this number. And that becomes the number, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing. In fact, it's necessary. Human beings are very tangibly driven animals. We like counting things. It's actually important. Can you imagine running a marathon without mile markers? It would actually be unnerving. So metrics help us measure speed and distance, which is very, very important. But we have to remember that when we hit a metric or don't hit a metric, the game has not been won or lost. They're markers, right? And that's the important part. So we have to stop thinking about business like a race or a game and start thinking of it like a lifestyle. So for example, I want to be healthy. Right? So there are many things I have to do to be healthy. I have to eat right, I have to exercise, I have to get enough sleep, I have to nurse my personal relationships. There's probably 15 or 20 other things. Can't do all of those things well all the time. It's a striving. Same in business. We have product, we have marketing, we have sales, we have leadership. Can't do them all right all the time. It's a striving. But we can set arbitrary goals like I want to lose X amount of weight by X date, right? And every day I'm going to stand on the scale. Some days I'll feel good and some days I'll feel bad. And when I hit my goal, I'm excited. But the problem is I have to keep exercising for the rest of my life. Like it hasn't ended simply because I hit a goal. And that's important to recognize. But what I find more interesting is what happens if you miss the goal? And the answer is nothing. Nothing happens. In fact, very often, we just miscalculated the time it'll take to achieve it. So if you're doing all the right things and you see the trend data is on path, and you just lose that weight in a month later or 2 months later, okay, you're healthier now, even missing the goal, than you were before. The bad news, where it gets dangerous is when we're so obsessed with that goal that I'll starve myself and stop drinking water to hit the goal, and I'm actually unhealthy. And companies do that. So the goals are good, and celebrating the wins are great, and there are wins. That's fantastic. But we have to remember that if we miss the goal, the question is, what's the trend data? Like, are we a healthy company? Are we taking care of each other? And I'll just go back a few years ago. Ginny Rometty, IBM missed its numbers. And Ginny Rometty made an internal video, which of course leaked, made an internal video that was sent out to the entire IBM that basically shit all over the sales team publicly. And I remember talking to somebody at IBM, and I'm like, what's with that video? And they're like, oh, so glad I'm not in sales, right? And basically berated them for missing the numbers. This was the first time IBM had missed its numbers, the first quarter in 69 quarters. And the CEO's response was to berate a team, berate an entire division, right? After 69 quarters, they missed their first one. Guess what happened after that berating of the team and what happened to the culture, and guess how many times they missed it after that? It continued. In other words, it's fine. It's fine to miss it. It's a game. It's a long game. So I think that's where we get confused, which is we become obsessed with we missed our numbers once, where we're doing fantastic, you know? So I think that's where it's just about keeping things in perspective. That's where the infinite mindset helps. It's just about perspective.
So Michelle.
Can I just compliment on that? Because I think that in our case, we've been discussing this in the last 2 days, and it's a very important topic for us because sometimes we set ourselves the wrong goals. Or even if we set the right goals, the right targets, to simplify the way that we measure, then we get too obsessed with that target, and the behavior that follows is the wrong behavior. So we've been talking here, for example, about the Beyond Beer space, which are these liquids that they address needs that consumers have, but that beer does not serve them because they like sweeter liquids or higher alcohol liquids or mixed liquids. And this is an incredible opportunity for us. One target can be a given number of net revenue. But this is not why we are going beyond beer. We are going beyond beer because we want this future with more cheers. We want to attract more consumers to our franchises. So we need to expand penetration, bring more consumers into the category, and the net revenue is just a consequence of that. It's just a milestone, a mark. But if people start trying to achieve that target so hard and so obsessed, then they will do like unhealthy sales that will not turn in the point of sales, that will leave retailers upset with our product with the wrong impression that the capital is trapped there, and then we lose the long-term game, which is attracting more consumers to the category. And we have made like a huge change on our compensation and rewards model to rebalance short and long term in a way that people get free of this obsession of these 12 months targets and trying to get there. And the other thing that I agree 100% here, my example is a much shallow one, but I love like sports, and I love all type of sports. And one of the sports that I follow is like martial arts. And there is this fighter, which I think that's one of the best ever. His name is Khabib Nurmagomedov. And this guy came up with one idea that is like, he always talks when he's fighting. The other guy is trash talk. He talks like serious stuff. And he was saying in one of these world championship fights, like, win or lose, doesn't matter. I know how much I put into. I know that I'm giving it all here today. And if God helps, I will win. If not, I will lose and I will come back. Because this guy, he is focused on that fight, but he knows what he wants for the long term.
Yeah.
So win and lose it today, circumstance. Winning the long term, I know where I'm going to.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a little bit of this idea of quarter by quarter. There will be win and lose. And we need to get used to that because you learn a lot when you lose. But if you are training hard, if you are exercising every day, if you are attracting more consumers every day, if you are working together with your communities, retailers, each and every day, then in the long term, I have little doubts that you can win.
Yeah.
Right? And this to me is this beauty of the idea of the infinite game, which I think that fits super well for purpose because there is no final milestone for a future with more cheers.
Yeah.
It really comes together very well on the idea.
And what you're capturing beautifully with that story is the ultimate competitor in an infinite game is yourself. It's fundamentally a game of constant improvement. That's all it is. Because, you know, as we said before, if a company goes bankrupt, nobody else wins anything. It's also a game where two organizations who sell similar products at similar price and similar quality can both be wildly successful at the same time, you know, even if the numbers are like this. And so I think what you're talking about is exactly right, which is the game is constant improvement, and the losses reveal to you opportunities to improve.
Well, I think constant improvement is something that we always strive for at ABI. You know, Michelle, it sounds like you're really talking about the fact that if we all focus on bringing our purpose to life, you know, focus on dreaming big to create a future with more cheers, that we'll all see the benefits from that. Can you talk a little bit about how you want everyone in this room to help bring that purpose to life?
Yeah, I think that the first point on that, and I like to repeat this over and over again, I think that we had like a couple of amazing moments when we were working on this purpose. And one came from one question that you asked, which was, what is the very own thing that defines your culture and that is there since the foundation? As you do this soul search, you always remember that that was part of the company. And we came up with this moment saying, this is dream big. And this was in our face all the time, right? And then there was the idea, we dream big to something, and this is really how we create more opportunities to people, how we have a higher impact in the society, how we help the economies of this community where we operate our business, how our retailers grow their business so we can grow together with them. And this is a job that's like, it's easy to define, come up with the purpose of the direction, but the execution is very granular, right? The execution depends on each and every country and each and every region and in the leaders that we have here at the room. That's why every time that I go to visit a different country, to talk to people, I want to know what they are doing that is related to our purpose so I can come back and tell the stories, right? So I think that what I expect is people really walk the talk and leave what we are discussing and trying to build together, because there are plenty of opportunities out there and no one person can execute all of them. So we need everybody to work together. But maybe you can also complement and tell me, how do you see the role of these people here? We have not the top 1% of the company, we have the top 0.1% of the company in the room, and they are the people that really drive and manage the company in the day-to-day, because they are very close to the operations, to the communities, to the suppliers, to the customers that you have. So how do you see their role in making this purpose now come to life and really have the full impact that we expect to have?
Well, they offer the most, first of all, they have the most wonderful job in the world, which is to take care of people. I mean, you know, the responsibility of most senior leaders is not to actually do the work of their departments, but to take care of the people who are doing the work in their departments. And that new skill set, that growth opportunity to become a great leader is magical. And when you see people do things, when you see people dream big to do something that creates a world with more cheers, like when you see them do that, it's like a parent catching, you know, you're catching your kids doing something wonderful, or sharing, or helping another child. It's like you realize, oh my God, it's all worth it. All the sacrifice, all that time, it's all worth it. So leadership is a magical thing, and to be a student of leadership is wonderful. So that's one. The other thing is there's an opportunity for massive creativity. You know, the thing that I like about your purpose statement, and I would do one slight thing, which is to drop the we. I mean, you can keep it up, obviously. I'm just saying practically. When you say dream big and it becomes an instruction, right? Like you literally can go back to your people and say, dream big. I mean, that's what I want you to do, and understand what it means. So how I interpret the cheers is, I mean, there's the obvious one, right? You know, there's beer, But Cheers is it's more than celebration. It requires at least two people. And what I love about it is it's about community. It's about people coming together. Whether it's happy or sad, it's about people taking care of each other. And I love how you're pushing people to rethink how we do things so that people come together and produce something that's worth celebrating at some point. And it doesn't have to do with product. I mean, as I said before, I'm realizing as I'm thinking this through, that challenge of, if GE was the leadership factory in the past, why not ABI for the future? Like, we're dreaming big and coming up with a reason to say, look what we've accomplished in the world. We've changed the course of global business. I mean, that has nothing to do with beer, but it has everything to do with your purpose. And I think that's the challenge and opportunity everybody here has, which is some of what you are able to bring to life with your purpose is in product, absolutely, and in sales and marketing and all the things that you'd expect. But some of it is actually how you actually do business. And your ability to interpret that cause, that purpose, through the actual business, I think is what makes your purpose actually have longevity, which it's more than just a product statement or a statement of like what we want to achieve in the world, based on numbers or metrics. It's actually a statement of how we think and how we approach problems and how we tackle problems. And I think that's the most important thing. And the most important thing is you have to practice it, meaning you have to come together and work together and help each other, because this is about community. It is about Cheers.
Well, and I think to that point, Simon, one of the 5 pillars of your book is specifically trusting teams.
Yeah.
And when you talked about IBM, for example, missing their target, among other things, it sounds like a culture issue and a communication breakdown. So when you look at ABI, I think everybody can agree we're really far along on, purpose, otherwise known in your book as just cause.
Yep.
Trusting teams and culture is hugely important to ABI. When you look at ABI or you look at other companies, what are sort of the key elements to building those trusting teams? And I would ask Michel as well, what does he want to see from us as far as the leaders of the company in terms of how we build those trusting teams?
So number one, trust is a feeling. You can't order people to trust you. And simply being smart or getting something right does not produce trust. Let's be crystal clear what a trusting team is. We've all been on one in the past, and I hope you're on one right now. We've all been on trusting teams where we have psychological safety to say out loud, I made a mistake, or I need help, or I don't know, or I've got some stuff at home and I'm struggling and it's affecting my work product, and I need help, without any fear of humiliation, retribution, or that'll affect your promotability. That's what being on a trusting team is, and that's what we have to build for the people who work for us. Not being on a trusting team, we've also all been there, unfortunately, where we're afraid to say, I made a mistake. We would never say, I don't know something or don't understand something. We would never ask for help because we're either going to get humiliated publicly or we're going to affect our promotability. And the opportunity to build trusting teams is what leadership is all about. That's where the strength of culture comes from. So yeah, it's essential to building any kind of business, short-term or long-term, but definitely a long-term company for sure. And all the stuff you talk about, challenging and pushing boundaries, means if you're pushing boundaries and you're thinking big, you're going to fall a lot. It happens. There's no such thing as innovation without experimentation, and experimentation inherently requires failure. And I think a lot of companies that are too finite-minded, they fear failure. They fear, well, let me restate. I actually don't like the word failure. You hear it a lot, which is, we have a fail-fast culture, I think the problem with the word failure is it's like the word cancer, which is there's a huge difference between stage 4 liver cancer and melanoma, and a mild melanoma. But they're both called cancer. That's the problem. And there are failures which are minor and overcomable, and there are failures that are catastrophic. But the problem is they're both called failure. I like the word falling. Failure we should work very hard to avoid. But falling, we should encourage because you can get back up. I know of one large gaming company, and I love this, that they don't have parties when they hit their goals. They have parties when they fail. They have parties when a game is a complete blowout, because they're trying to acculturize being comfortable with missing a goal or complete abject failure. And they have a party, and they have their own champagne, which it has a label on it. Their own label, I think it's called, they're called lessons. And on the back of the champagne bottle after the party, they actually write the lessons they learned from the failure. And so it's a company that's very comfortable with failing, which means they try again very easily, and they're super innovative. So creating a culture where falling is part of the game, I think is wonderful. It has to be celebrated. I love it.
And interestingly, I'll tell you, when I interviewed with Michelle, you spoke to me about how specifically special the culture of ABI is. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I also both have had the privilege of being offered help and been told to ask for help by you. How did you come to this sort of way of leadership?
So if I go back to the previous question before answering that, I think that trust is at the very center of building teams and having engaged teams. And trust is earned, it's not given. It's not because you are the director or the vice president that people trust you. And you need to earn every day, because every day you have a different situation. Today I'm happy, tomorrow I have a problem at home, the day after tomorrow I made something right, and the next day I did something wrong. So people need to, one, earn the trust. Second, I really think that this idea of exposing the vulnerabilities, talking about things that do not work, not having a theater of just greens and success and things that you achieved, is super, super important in building trust. I love the conversations that I have with people when people come to talk to me and say, let me share with you the things that are not working. And here is what we are trying to learn and get organized so we can fix that. So this is like the best way for you to start any conversation, because then you can really focus on what matters and getting the business to be better. And sometimes you see people trying to handpick and choose KPIs to tell you a story in which everything is beautiful, but the numbers and the data, and in today's world we have visibility of everything, you know what's working, what's not working. And in terms of culture, I always like to think that our culture is very simple, travels everywhere. I actually always spoke about that, so I had the chance to manage our business in China and find amazing people that understand our culture and live through the same principles and perform at very high level in China or in the United States or in Latin America. Simple, is a high performance culture, so people, they like to think that they can run, eat well, lose weight, compete and party and do everything at the same time, so people are very active. And it's a culture that when people like, they really feel good about and they want to have a contribution. When they don't like, it's very hard for you to be in that place, because if you disagree too much, if you don't want candor, if you don't want to talk about problems, if you want to hide yourself, it's very difficult, because we don't have like closed offices, because we have performance targets, because we do performance appraisal. And my recommendation for people from outside is what I told you, is speak up, look for people to help you. Every time that you have an idea, bring this forward. Don't let people just shut you down. And at the end, I always tell people, if you have any issues that you cannot solve, come to me, I will help you. And it's a simple culture. That's what I like. It's like, I like to think that we are all like athletes. We want to perform and improve our own marks, and we can do this with people that are in the same team as us. So that's what our culture is about.
Great.
It's nice.
I want to make sure we have time for audience questions. So we'll ask one more question here, and then we'll go to the audience.
Love it.
Michelle, you talk a lot about how reputation is a driver for us from a commercial strategy perspective. Can you just touch on how you think our purpose really helps bring that to life, and what you see it going forward, helping us build to?
Yeah, I'll go quick so we can open up. I'm sure that you guys are craving to ask questions for Simon. We've been seeing each other already for like 24 hours. But I think that the very simple thing here is, we have an amazing company. We are part of an incredible industry and an incredible category. So beer is a big category. I repeat this all the time. One out of 100 jobs out there is related to our industry, from farming to the retailers and bars and restaurants. 1 out of 100. We have a huge impact in the communities where we operate. We have a category that's very inclusive, men, women, young, old. It doesn't matter where you come from. You can always sit, drink a beer, talk, and that's gonna serve you in many different purposes, shapes, and forms. It's very natural, 4 ingredients, right? So barley, yeast, water, hops, and you have these incredible beers. And it's very local, right? So different from other companies, we are not like designed in Palo Alto and produced in Bangalore or in Bangladesh or somewhere in China. So we have businesses across 50 plus countries, several factories and people and communities that rely on the work that we do. But we have not been telling our story out there all the time. And because of that, others start to tell our story and build the reputation that we need to live with because we don't have the courage to go there and tell our story and say what we stand for and what we do. And the most incredible thing is that when people get to know us, the more they know, the more they like. So we were in this event that I just was sharing here, the result of the work that you all do, and I start talking to people in Washington, and you can imagine the conversations, the audience and people, and the conversation was 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and was unstoppable. At one point in time, we were talking for more than an hour, and people continued to ask questions about what we do in Africa. How do we support the retailers in Mexico? How is this thing of designing the seeds that we use for barley in Argentina and Brazil? And people don't really know the beauty that exists inside the BI. And I think that as we work together, collectively, to tell our story, to build our reputation, then it's always easier to open any door, to do business, to bring partners in, to have more people sharing the dreams with us, because we'll never be able to realize all the dreams only by ourselves. We need partnerships, we need extensions of the company. We need to bring people to work with us and help us to achieve what we want to achieve. And this is what reputation is. It takes a life to build, but you need to build, and you need to take care, because if you lose for one moment, it's gone forever, right? And if not us, to bring the reputation of the beer category, if not us, to build the reputation of ABI, who then, right? So we need to tell our story.
I'm living proof of that, by the way, which is, you know, of course I know Anheuser-Busch, you know, I knew some of your brands, not all of them, and I was like, whatever, beer, you know. And when I got to know you, you know, I fell for something and saw something that I didn't know, and understand that there is something really pretty magical going on here, and narrative really matters, and your ability to tell your story that goes beyond product is I think an amazing opportunity. So that people shouldn't have to they shouldn't have to have a meeting with you to know how magical you are. You know, it only reinforces it. If I may, you know, I talk about the concept of worthy rivalry, which is the other companies out there who, you know, do things better than you, so you can learn from them. And the way that Phil Knight used to talk about Nike, I don't know if you've ever heard the story. He was speaking at a large conference, 1,000-some-odd people, whatever it was. And, you know, most CEOs, as you know, when they show up to talk about their companies, they talk about revenues and market share and, you know. And he stood up and he said to the audience, if any of you have ever run for exercise, can you please stand up? Most of the room stood up. He said, if you run at least once a week, please keep standing, everybody else sit down. Most of the room sits down. He says, if you run on, you know, twice a week, please keep standing. He says, if you run 3 times a week, rain or shine, regardless of the weather or the temperature, please keep standing. There's now a smattering of people in the room. And he looks out at them and he says, the next time you're out there before the sun is up, it's dark, it's cold, and it's wet, and you're running by yourself, we're the ones standing under the lamppost cheering you on. That's how he described Nike. And in an instant, you understand what just do it means. Just do it has nothing to do with winning. It has to do with trying. And if you look at the history of their advertising, Bo knows this and all of those things. It had nothing to do, my favorite one was the kid who takes the steak. I don't know if you remember this old TV commercial. Kid somewhere in Latin, South America takes a soccer ball, puts it on the kitchen table, takes a red raw steak out of the fridge and wipes the blood all over the soccer ball. And then he goes outside and puts it on and all the dogs in the neighborhood sniff the blood, and they start running and chasing him, and he's kicking the ball. It has nothing to do with winning. It has everything to do with trying. It has everything with doing. And his story, his ability, his narrative captured that so exquisitely. And when Nike's at their best, they celebrate the ones who do, not the ones who win. And yet, ironically, it's one of these major sports brands. And I think you have an amazing opportunity for people to fall in love with you the same way we fall in love with Nike.
Great. Thank you.
Let's get to the audience.
Well, we have some time for some audience questions. So I believe we've got some mics around the room.
We have Andreas in the back there.
Andreas?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon, and thank you for sharing your personal story and why purpose is so important for each of us, not only for companies. Really move and touch with your comments. In this company, we call responsible drinking, promoting responsible drinking, we call it smart drinking. How do you see the role of smart drinking into our purpose going forward?
I don't think, so smart drinking is a practical necessity for the product that you have because it has alcohol in it, right? Like there is actually a healthy, there's a safe and unsafe component to your product, right? Like any product, like, if you make a car, we want you to drive not like a crazy person, like you have to drive responsibly, And so if your purpose is about community and taking care of each other, if your purpose is about dreaming big and creating a world where there's more cheers, I think one of the things that instilling responsible drinking or smart drinking actually is actually less about the individual, because if they got the point where they drank too much, I don't know, they don't usually stop. It's about our friends. It's usually our friends who say, I'll drive. It's our friends who say, I think you've had enough. It's our friends who say, just one more. I actually think smart drinking is very much built in your purpose when it's done the best. And I think to say that every individual person has responsibility for themselves at all misses the point of what it means to be a human being. So I think if we can inspire people to take care of their friends who've reached a limit, I think that really captures your purpose.
Great. Thank you, Simon. Do we have additional questions? I'm sure we do. I see
a hand on the back there.
There you go.
It's Carla.
Carla? Great.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for sharing everything with us. I have a question on vulnerability. We have a massive cultural revolution going on, and we see here high leadership really engage with that.
Yep.
There is a difficulty. We say that we are not leaders anymore that know all the answers, but we learn everything. But it's difficult in practice to be vulnerable and to accept and not being able to have all the answers. So if you can share with us more on how to exercise vulnerability and how we as high leaderships can also influence middle management to exercise vulnerability.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a great question, and that word scares a lot of people. When we're told you have to be vulnerable, right? It's scary to a lot of people. It doesn't mean you have to walk through the halls crying every day. That's not what it means. What vulnerability means simply is I'm willing to share, as I said before, I made a mistake, I don't understand, I don't know, I need help. Because that is a position of weakness, right? Because as leaders, we think we have to know all the answers. We think we have to be right all the time. And the problem is when we project that, it actually has a negative impact, which is we now put pressure on people that they always have to be right and they have to have all the answers because I'm always right and I have all the answers. In other words, you'll never get the truth out of anybody because that's the example that you set. Being vulnerable, when you say in a meeting, I don't know, or I don't understand, can somebody explain that to me again? What you're doing is you're creating an environment where other people can say, I don't know, can you explain it to me? And you get more information that way. But I think even expressing how we feel, right? I think people are afraid of that. And I think COVID was a little bit magical because we saw people at home, we saw people in sweatpants, we saw people with their kids running through the screen and their cats jumping across, and it was imperfect. And things, you lost the sound and we had bad connection, and it was all fine. Everybody was patient. And I really appreciated that we learned to be patient with people's humanity. But how many leaders talked about when they were really struggling during COVID? I went, at the beginning of COVID, I called a friend of mine. We had to pivot our organization. Because we made most of our money from in-person events. And I called a friend of mine who's active duty military. And I said, how do you compartmentalize your emotions so you can stay mission focused? Because I gotta stay mission focused. I don't have time to worry about what's going on. And he gave me a very stern warning. He said, you can't. He said, no one can compartmentalize their emotions. He said, at best we can do it for a short period of time, but every single one of us will suffer the trauma of combat. He says, the hard part is you may not suffer it in the moment, you may suffer it 4, 5, or 6 months later after you've been home already. He says, so the stern warning is you're gonna suffer the trauma of COVID at some point. And I called all my A-type personality friends and said, we're gonna be hit, there's no avoiding it, no matter how strong we think we are, it's gonna hit us. And we all made a deal to call each other if we started to struggle. And sure enough, one by one, 4, 5, 6 months into COVID, the phone started to ring and people were really struggling. And we all made a deal that we never cry alone. If you have to cry, you call somebody. That was the deal we made with each other. And sure enough, almost on schedule, about 4 or 5 months in, I started to go through my depression. Did struggle to recognize it, right? Was afraid to call it depression because, I'm a happy-go-lucky guy. I don't have depression. I don't want to be diagnosed, right? But that's what it was. I was suffering trauma from COVID. And one of the first things I did was talk to my team. Well, actually, the first thing I did was I called my active military friend and said, what are your symptoms when you suffered the trauma of And he answered my question. He said, well, my sleep pattern gets really screwed up. He said, I go to bed really late for no reason, and I don't want to get out of bed in the morning. And I was like, yep. And he's like, I don't really want to talk to anybody. I become really antisocial, and I'm definitely not asking anybody for help. And I was like, yep. And he's like, I'm unproductive, he says. I'll have an unproductive day. And he goes, that's okay. I'll rationalize it. That's okay. You're fine. You've been busy. It's okay. And then I'll have another and another and another. And I'll keep trying to hide it. And I was like, yep. And that's when I realized I was in it. And so one of the first things I did was we had an all hands team, as we always do. We had one of our company all hands meetings. I said, I'm going through it, guys. I said, I'm really struggling hard. I said, my sleep pattern's off. I'm not motivated. I'm struggling to ask for help. I'm going through this. And I just need you to all be a little patient with me. I'm figuring it out. I'm sorting it out. I'm asking for help. But I'm not going to be very good right now. And I just need you, as a team, I need you to be patient with me. That I did that to my team made it possible for them to do that to me. If I had pretended that I was happy throughout all of it, I would have put pressure on everybody who was struggling to pretend that they were being happy. And the worst part about that as a leader is then how can I help if I don't know? And we make the mistake very often that when somebody's high performing, that they're fine, because some people, the way they manage stress is to double down at work. So their performance will actually be through the roof, and they're struggling really hard. So performance is no indication of someone's stress. And so I think when the ability to be vulnerable is one of the greatest and most difficult leadership lessons any of us can learn. But it is so important to building trust when people see us as human, because it allows them to be human too.
Do we have another, I see, in the middle of the room?
And if that whole story scared you, if you feel like you're going through something like that, call one of each other. I assume you have friends in the room, and do it to one person. I'm struggling. What do I do? And you'll find that you can produce tremendous courage when you have at least one person who's got your back.
I think we have Craig there, right? Oh, no.
I'm
Okay.
here.
Pablo.
Thank you, Simon, for the inspiration and also thank you for the challenge, about GE being the leadership factor of the past and how can ABI become the new one, right? I wanted to ask you, can you give us 2 or 3 examples of what GE and Jack Welch got wrong and how ABI should think about it differently
Sure.
to become the new leadership factor of the future?
Yeah, absolutely. so in the mid to late 1970s, an economist by the name of Milton Friedman offered an entirely new definition of the purpose of business. He said the purpose of business is to maximize profit within the bounds of the law. That's a very low standard. Like, what about ethics, right? But this new definition of business, which was simply to maximize profit, believe it or not, that wasn't the definition of the responsibility of the business prior, right? It was more Adam Smith, which is to produce great product, and great product is how we, take care of the consumer, and that's what makes us thrive, and all of that stuff. And it shifted the focus of business inwards, and a lot of executives embraced it. And you started to see that Miltonian embracement of really start to gain momentum in the 80s and was full-fledged in the 90s and 2000s. So it has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. We saw it fly, and we saw policy change to embrace that definition. So for example, there was no such thing as using mass layoffs on a regular basis to manage the numbers. There was no such thing as mass layoffs to balance the books prior to the early 1980s. It did not exist. It was used as a last resort when the company was really losing money, right? Did not exist. That's number one. Number two, the whole idea of rank and yank that Jack Welch popularized, where you rank the entire company based solely on performance, you promote the top 10% and fire the bottom 10% every single year, with no assessment as to, are they stabbing each other in the, are those high performers bad for the culture, stabbing each other in the back for their individual performance? And are the low performers struggling with other kinds of issues? Maybe they're under stress, maybe it's market conditions, who knows? Didn't matter. You get ranked, you get fired, you get promoted. Guess what that did to the culture? Everybody was stabbing each other, right? The imbalance of shareholder supremacy. Taking care of our shareholders was always a thing. It's not an issue, but it wasn't considered more important than the customer or the employee. We now live in a world where the shareholder is now considered more important than the customer and the employee, and you hear bankers and CEOs talk, they're talking nonsense when they talk about their fiduciary duty, right? It's completely made up. And that all was popularized by Jack Welch. He was the poster child for all of these new ways of running business that are now completely standardized. One of my favorite stories is actually from Gary Ridge, who's the CEO, he just retired CEO of WD-40, which is a public company. And he was on his analyst call, and his analyst said, "Gary, you missed your numbers." And Gary said, "No, I missed your numbers. My numbers are just fine." But that all of that, that companies are making decisions based on a 27-year-old analyst telling you that what you need to do so he can get his bonus, like that. We can thank Jack Welch for all of that.
I see we have a question right here.
I think we have Craig there. Craig was first.
I have strong opinions.
Flavio has the mic. Flavio.
By the way,
Bring it up.
I'm also the first to admit that the pressure is very, very difficult and overwhelming from the public markets. I don't mean to minimize it, that it is very difficult to find the courage to do the right thing that you know is right for your company, despite all the pressures from the external markets, from the outside. I don't mean to diminish the pressures. I know it's huge, but there's already a movement to start to push back, and I love that.
So Simon, as a follow-up to that, you're talking about incentives in the short-term mindset. So what's the right incentive structure when you think about the infinite game of business?
Sure. So it has to be balanced. There's no such thing as a perfect, first of all, there's no such thing as a perfect company. Let's start there. Just like there's no such thing as a perfect person, despite what we think about ourselves, right? That was a joke. It's always a striving, and it's always constant improvement. And going back to some of the stuff that Jack Welch did, which is the incentive structures became too lopsided, where the performance of the company actually was not how executives were compensated, it was only the performance of the equity of the stock. And we think about that for a second. When a company announces mass layoffs, the stock price usually goes up. And when they announce a huge investment in R&D, the stock price usually goes down, right? Which, if you think about business, it's the opposite. And so it's about a rebalancing, which is, I think, performance of company needs to be included. I think that long-term needs to be included. I think that adherence to values needs to be included. So that's all fine and good. You're a high performer and your numbers are great, but nobody trusts you. You stabbed 1,000 people in the back to get to the numbers you're doing, and you are actually damaging our culture. No, you don't get a promotion, you know? There's one company I know out there who does what they call 50-50 bonuses. 50% of your bonus is based on your numbers, and 50% of your bonus is based on contribution to culture. So if you hit your numbers and you ignore culture, 50%. If all you do is walk around and check on everybody, but you don't actually do any work, 50%, you know? The point is, and it goes back to what I was saying before, unfortunately, there's not a lot that exists out there about companies that have profoundly changed these things, especially in the public markets, you know? It's very much the old ways. And there's companies that are experimenting here and there with bits and pieces, but like really robust trust measurements that can be included into somebody's compensation package kind of doesn't exist. And so this is where I challenge ABI to think big, which is the metrics need to be invented. And just like Jack Welch either invented new or created such an imbalance for the metrics that have become standardized today, we need to invent new and recalibrate. But I wish I could tell you which company has done it, but it hasn't been done. Not en masse, anyway.
Right over here.
Thank you. Hello. So Simon, thank you very much for the thoughts and the comments. And Michelle and Kate and Jen, thank you for this session. I will say I found it very valuable. And took a lot of notes and words already. But I'd like to pull out one word, Simon, that you said, which was preacher, at the very beginning, and ask a little bit about that word and to dig into it. Because when I hear the word preacher, you know, there has been a lot of lack of trust in the world, within religion, between countries, media, government, neighbors, between, you know, almost every indication. So we're almost in a low trust world that's here, and yet we're trying to create a high trust company and culture that's centered around the purpose itself. So my question is when you think about how you be an effective preacher, particularly for kind of this leadership group, where we are all tasked with that, very much and the purpose and living that purpose and talking about that purpose, how do you be an effective preacher, not a false prophet, and really make it live and breathe in the organization?
Right.
What have you found that works well?
So so the word authenticity is bandied around a little too much, you know, so it's kind of lost its meaning a little bit. But the true definition of authenticity is that you say and do the things you actually believe. And I believe these ideas to the core of my being. And the reason you can tell is because I talk about them with great passion. That's not, you can't manufacture passion. Like I can't give you a passionate, you know, presentation about the migration patterns of European swallows, because I don't care, right? And so to be passionate is finding connection. Passion is an output, not an input. I always love that. We only hire passionate people. Well, how do you know that they're passionate for interviewing but not for working, you know? Passion is an output. Like when I'm a part of something bigger than myself, when I love my team, when I feel supported, what you get is passion. You know, working hard for something we don't believe in is called stress. Working hard for something we love is called passion. And so, number one, you yourself have to connect with the purpose of the organization. If you find it corny or cheesy, then this may not be the place for you. Like, you actually have to find personal connection in it. And as Michelle said before, like in the past, it felt superficial. And I've seen that a lot in companies where executives are expected to go, you know, preach, but they don't even believe in it. I asked them in private, like, do you believe in it? Like, no, not really. You know, they have to read it. They don't even know what it is. You know, they can't even remember it. So you have to find connection in it, and more important, you have to look for examples that bring it to life, both in culture, but even outside. You know, it's not always product related, as I talked about before. Dreaming big to produce more cheers could be, it's a mindset, it's an operating principle. And so I think people are smart. You know, you can fool them for a little bit, but eventually they catch on. And people ask me all kinds of questions, and what they find is consistency in my answers. And sometimes I'll say things that are unpopular, or sometimes that I'll say things that, you know, maybe I shouldn't say in public. I am polite, but I still say the truth. Like I remember I spoke at a large company, we'll leave their name out to protect the innocent or the guilty. And one of the C-level executives came up to me before, and he says, listen, I know you talk a lot about layoffs, and don't talk about them in your session because we have an unannounced round of layoffs that's coming because we missed our numbers, right? So don't talk about it, he instructed me. And I said to him very polite, like, listen, I'm not gonna target you, I'm not gonna humiliate you, and I'm not gonna bring it up, but if somebody asks me a question about it, I'm gonna talk about it. And he says, I don't want you to. I said, then you shouldn't have hired me. Like you know who I am, and this is what you get. Like, I'm not your monkey, you know? I didn't say that. He asked me to think about it, and somebody asked the question, and I answered it, you know? And I told them my opinion about what they do to a culture. And I understand that sometimes they happen, but they have to happen for the right reasons, and they can't happen on a regular basis because the cost is dramatic. The damage we do to the culture is dramatic. So it really, really, really has to be worth it to do that much damage and that much cost. You get the point. And so I think to be effective preachers, which some of you will be naturally better at than others, it's not a problem. This is why we have each other. We're partners. But part of your job in senior leadership is to embody love of the brand, which doesn't necessarily mean, you know, being a preacher. You don't have to necessarily stand on stages, but you do get to find fun ways to bring it to life, like starting a meeting. Like, you can start every meeting talking about it. Like Dick Robinson, who used to run Scholastic, they had an amazing cause, which is to inspire children to love reading. And he would bring it up in every meeting. Remember what our cause is. It's to inspire kids to love reading. And he was constantly reminding people, and people loved it and believed in it. It's why they worked there. I bring up our cause. We imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and end the day fulfilled by the work that they do. I talk about it constantly. I bring it up in our own meetings with our own team. I make no assumptions that everybody knows it, no matter how many times they've heard me say it. And I think that's what it means to be a preacher, which is, look at real preachers, you know, people who talk about their faith. People who talk about their children, right? It's like, ugh, more about your kids, right? It's like people, when they have love for something, all they want to do is tell you about it. And that's what it means to have, that's what I think it means to be a preacher. It means to have love.
Can you wait for the mic 1 second? You have it? Okay, there we go.
Simon, question here in the back. In your books and conferences, you talk about the generational gap,
yep.
Especially for newcomers into the workforce.
Yep.
As senior leaders here, what advice can you give us in practice to become more self-aware?
It's a hard one. And this younger generation seems to be getting harder. Because they're way more activists. Millennials were difficult, but this younger generation, they're more activist, which when it's like climate change, we love it. But like when you're like the intern and you're sending an email to the CEO going, I don't think that you, there's other ways to do that. It starts with empathy. It starts with empathy. And we have to understand, it's for better or for worse, the changing nature of what work has become in our lives. If you go back a bunch of decades, it used to be that you got your sense of purpose from church, you got your sense of community from bowling league, you knew your neighbors, you barbecued with them on the weekends, and work, I was loyal to work and work was loyal to me. At some point I'd get a gold watch. Aside, there's an entire generation that when I talk about the gold watch, they have no idea what I'm talking about, right? That's how much the world has changed. And work was simply a place that I made a living to pay my bills. But I still enjoyed it was still loyalty. Over the course of time, church attendance is down, bowling clubs don't exist anymore, we don't talk to our neighbors, we become very insular. And what's happened is all of that pressure is now being put on the office. I now expect my company to be the place where I get my purpose, the place I get my friendships, the place I get my community, the place I get my social life. Now we've also added the place you have to agree with all of my politics, right? That's a new one. And it's even now, especially during COVID, it's gone up even higher, especially for this young group, where you also have to be my therapists, my therapy. I'm going to bring all of my problems to work. And where the idea of emotional professionalism seems to have gone away. You know, where you actually see people sitting in meetings like this, and you're like, what's going on? Having a bad day, right? That's emotionally unprofessional, right? I want you to bring your emotions to work. I want you to bring your whole self to work. But for the same reason that we exercise emotional professionalism in other aspects of our lives, we also do it at work. So one of the struggles of this young generation is they are not equipped on how to deal with stress. They're just less equipped than previous generations for various reasons, including social media, internet, and you know, parenting and all the rest of it. There's many reasons for it, but they're really not good at dealing with stress. They're really bad at dealing with confrontation. They're so confrontation avoidant that they would rather ghost someone than break up with them after dating them for 6 months, right? That they would rather quit their job than ask their boss for a raise. And usually in spectacular fashion, like, you don't value me, you don't pay me enough, you're like, if you just asked, I would have given you a raise, and we love you. But they quit because they're just afraid of the conversation. So they're very intimidated by confrontation, they're ill-equipped to deal with stress, there's an emotional immaturity, emotional unprofessionalism, right? And it's not a good thing or a bad thing, it just is. And so us having empathy and understanding that is important. And so it raises the question, how are they dealing with their stress? Not well. And so there's a new phenomenon that I'm seeing happening in a lot of offices where, especially young people, are finding the one or two the empaths on the team, and they're going to them with all of their problems. And it's not the traditional, I hate my boss, I hate my job. Venting about work is fine, I have no issue with that. But it's, I hate my mom, I don't know what I want to do with my life, when am I going to leave my house, my boyfriend's not working out, my girlfriend's not working out, like every problem in my life on this one or two people at work. And we've had it happen on our team. We had 3 people quit. And I got a little team. I got 3 people who quit because they said they were burnt out. And I was like, I know how much work you do. What do you mean you're burnt out? So I'm like, do you have another job on the side? How can you be burnt out? You know? What I discovered is they were the empaths on the team, and everybody was calling them to unload. They were burnt out because they were taking on everybody's stress, and they were exhausted. They couldn't take it anymore, and they just quit. And when I talked about this publicly, I had a 23-year-old come up to me in one of the companies and said, I do that. And so we have to recognize they are struggling in a changing, chaotic, crazy world right now where there's so much uncertainty in this world. Like the world is always uncertain, but my God, it's war and the countries at each other's throat, and there's challenge and the global warming, and it's just insane, these poor kids. And they have no outlet. They don't know how to deal with it. So it's a challenge for all of us, is how do we hold space for them? And the problem is they don't even recognize when we're doing the right thing for them. That's the hardest part. A lot of anger, but the problem is it's gonna take a bit. Like, we're in a period of extreme flux, and it's not gonna settle for a little bit. It's gonna be a very bumpy road for the next few years. There's no right answer. And you will be no good deed will go unpunished, but keep trying, because they're people, they're humans, and they're struggling. Sorry for the long answer.
Hello. First of all, Michelle and Simon, I've been around here for a long time, and I just want to say thank you for having the courage to open up the space to even have a conversation like this in a group like this. So number one, thank you for that. That's very encouraging. I think my question is having Simon and James back to back is very interesting, right? Because we have to manage the quarterly earnings, and yet we have to have the faith to invest and make the right decisions for the long time. So Simon, how do we better manage that inevitable tug of war between those two very important things that we have to do, the and versus the or?
And again, tension is fine. There's nothing wrong with tension. But it's recognizing that, and it goes back to the analogy I gave before, which is hitting a number doesn't mean the game is over, and missing a number doesn't mean the game is over. you know, and recognizing that we have to survive is more important. That we have to. One of the fascinating things during COVID was because most companies went into such survival mode that literally zero companies were concerned with what their competition was doing. Literally zero. No one cared about their competition. They cared about survival. Well, that's the right attitude regardless of what the economy is like. Don't worry about what your competition is doing. They're doing great, right? Worry about what you're doing. The only time you worry about your other competitors is if they do something better than you and you can learn from them because their strengths reveal to your weaknesses. And so there's nothing wrong with the tension between the short term and long term as long as you know that it's not equal. It's this. Long term is always more important, always. Because if you focus excessively on short term, you're building a short term company. Look at GE. It's a shadow of its former self. And it's leadership. You have permission from the highest levels to think that way. You have permission at the highest levels to dream big and reimagine how we think about our business. And inevitably, if you're going to challenge the status quo, which is to challenge the way the public markets currently work, where you're forced to make decisions from the outside that you know are bad for your business. Every senior executive of a public company knows that. Big open secret, like we all know that, right? That if we're going to start pushing against those tensions, and we're not going to do it in an angry and aggressive way, but we're going to start pushing. And there's plenty of examples of companies that are starting to push. You know, CVS when they took all the cigarettes out of their aisles because it didn't align with their purpose. Wall Street had a conniption. Turns out all the EBITDA, all not the EBITDA,
margins.
It's I've forgotten the specific margin, but everything came back within a week, and the stock price went crazy. And the thing that the analysts didn't know is loyalty from customers and employees skyrocketed. That people chose to spend more money at CVS. They didn't lose any money. When American Airlines decided to give pay rises to their flight attendants and their pilots out of contract, where Wall Street demanded that they ask for something in return or not do it, wait till the contract expires. And American Airlines said, no, they're the lowest paid employees in the industry. We have to do right by them and ask for nothing in return. American Airlines actually does something that's very sophisticated that I really appreciated. They have bifurcated their shareholder community. So when they say that they're shareholder driven, they've actually bifurcated the group into long-term holders and short-term holders. And they actually focus exclusively on the long-term holders. Because the short-term ones are fair-weathered fans. They don't actually care what kind of business you're running. And if you're doing well, they invest in you anyway. And so what American Airlines did is they literally ignored this group of investors and they pay attention to these. So when they called those investors and said, we're about to give this big pay rise, those investors went, it's the right thing to do. Go ahead and do it. We believe in you. We know the stock's going to get hammered for a short period, but that's okay. Do it. That's being shareholder driven in a healthy way. I thought that was very clever. But again, they're pushing up against the limits. They're not coming in with a sledgehammer.
Simon, let me just make one question here, and then I go to you, Angelica. One thing that to me is interesting, I'm just wondering if you can give us some ideas on that. I was in Cannes, and we saw that for the first time, like majority of the Lions and awards, they were given to brands that presented work related to purpose, sustainability, causes. So it's almost like if this dominated the creative environment, and there was a lot of creativity, but linked to a purposeful execution. And this morning here we were talking to an analyst that was saying that for the first time in many, many months and quarters, majority of the conversations that he has been having with investors is not moving around ESG, sustainability, and things like that. So what do you think that the current situation of recession, war, economic crisis, and this new generation coming will provoke as a change? So what do you think that are emerging trends and disruptions that will come? So what are we going to see 5 years down the road in Cannes? What's the new big thing coming?
So I think we forget that companies are living, breathing animals. And the ones that thrive over the long term are able to adapt with changing politics, changing tastes, changing culture, changing technologies. And we've seen entire industries disappear because they were incapable of adapting to new technology. The internet's the best example. Like, literally didn't know what to do, so they just went out of business. Or like if you look at television or movies or music or publishing, they're all still playing defense, still trying to catch up and figure out this internet thing because they have these old business models. And I think it's a powerful thing when Larry, when the Business Roundtable, makes a public statement about the importance of purpose, weirdly signed by Jamie Dimon, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson, the CEO of Progressive. Johnson & Johnson had to pay $550 million fine for its role in the opioid crisis. Jamie Dimon, thinks purpose is how much you give back to your community. Like, they're not really good representatives of what purpose is, but the point is the pressure from the market, the pressure from young people and employees that this really matters to us is actually forcing these CEOs who, they may have had a come to Jesus moment that year, all three of them simultaneously, it may have happened, but I just love that. It means that the thing that we stand for, the things that we're talking about here, are actually shaping business. And where for too many years, it was those folks who are forcing us to do it their way, now we're actually applying the pressure and they're starting to talk like us, even if they don't believe it. And so I'm less concerned about what the advertising looks like in 5 years, because I think the advertising is a reflection. I think the advertising simply reflects what people want to hear. So the fact that they want to hear that, I think, is fantastic. My aspiration is that companies actually start doing it, not talking about it. That it's one thing to make a piece of marketing about it, a piece of advertising about it. It's quite another thing to make a strategic decision back at your company about it. So I'm hoping that the actions follow the words more. But yeah, no, it seems to be going in the right direction.
Angelica.
Simon, a moment ago you discussed about the relevance of the narrative.
Yeah.
My question is if you have any advice or a benchmark on how to do this in a very bold manner outside, how to position a good narrative of our purpose that you helped us to create outside.
So there's many ways to do narrative. There's no right way. I mean, one of the ways it shows up, obviously, is going to be in some of your marketing, especially your brand work, of course. I think there are some very clever things you can do at a product level. And this is what I love about purpose. When you have clear and compelling purpose, it starts to make you creative, right, at every level. So, for example, and again, learn from your worthy rivals. Do you remember a bunch of years ago, one of the soda companies, I think it was Coca-Cola, they put people's names on cans, and you just would go, remember, just for a while, it was just a marketing thing. I mean, you could write things on cans that capture the spirit of what cheers means. I mean, you could write cheers, but you can actually write statements like, cheers because I love you, cheers because congratulations. Cheers. Like, you can write those things on the cans, and you can start to do it in product. That's narrative. You're starting to tell your story through your product. Also, the way you talk about your jobs, quite frankly. If I ask the average employee at ABI, if I were to sit next to them on a plane and say, what do you do? The dreaded question, right? What do you do? Oh, I'm a marketing manager at Anheuser-Busch. Okay, right? What would it mean if they were to actually say something at a higher level than that? Oh, I get to help find new ways to bring people together to celebrate each other and take care of each other. That's amazing. How do you do that? I'm actually a marketing manager at Anheuser-Busch, right? Where when narrative starts to seep into the culture, people start talking about the cause before they start talking about their jobs. Marines. If you ask somebody in the army, what do you do? They'll say, oh, I work in the infantry, blah blah blah. If you ask a Marine, what do you do? They say, I'm a Marine. That's what comes first. It's the global, right? It's the membership. I think every time you every time you show up on television, and every time you give a public speech, goes back to that story of Phil Knight. And I'm not proposing you tell Phil Knight type story. But the point is like you're going to go on Squawk Box, and they're going to ask you a question, and your ability to talk about your cause, not sometimes in the literal words, but sometimes in interpretive words, and how you imagine the company coming to, and what bold means, what dreaming big means, and sharing some of those dreams. And like, we're a company that says we dream big. Let me tell you what we mean by let me tell you some of the dreams we have. And you can talk about how you're changing your incentive structures. You can talk about how you're challenging old notions of business. You can talk about how the world is changing and you're not going to follow the change, you're going to lead the change. This is all narrative, and it all is based on the same core. So to answer your question, there's no right answer, but if you listen to all of the different narratives, they all have a flavor. It's like somebody asked before, like, how am I an effective preacher? If you go watch any video I've made, and if you go read any book that I've written, you can feel that there's a theme. That theme is always there. And people are smart. People can discern themes. And so the more consistent you are in all the different ways you bring it to life, people start to understand what that theme is. Like Disney. It's always there.
I think we have time for one more, right?
That's right.
I see Felipe there. No.
Simon, how do you see companies measuring success towards the purpose? Like usually how are companies measuring, or like if they are far or close to achieving kind of your purpose or your dream?
So purpose is always idealized, right? Like, as I said before, I imagine a world in which, right? I know I'm not going to get there. Like when Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. Like one day little black children will hold hands on the playground with little white children, right? Like all of these things, they're all strivings. And the milestones that we pass make us feel like we're making progress. And that's why metrics are really important and milestones are really important. And the most important thing is context. There's nothing wrong with quarterly numbers or annual numbers. The only question I would ask is, to what end? To what end? Like, I was talking to a young entrepreneur last night, and she's looking for investment. And one of her potential investors said, how long is it going to take you to hit $100 million revenues? And I said, don't take that person's investment. Show me one article, one. I just need one. Show me one article in HBR, one study, I don't care, that demonstrates that hypergrowth or high-speed growth is good for the company on any level. The answer is there are none. The pressure comes from that person trying to achieve their financial goals. So they put pressure on you to make your short-term goals, right? And so there's nothing wrong with goals as long as we understand the context and the purpose of that goal, right? I like to think of money like fuel, right? And a car is the company, and the purpose is the destination, right? And if money is fuel, it makes the car go. You absolutely have to have money to make the company go. There is no dreaming big if you have no fuel. You can have the most beautiful car in the world, and yet if you got no fuel, it's pointless. But we don't own a car to buy fuel, right? We don't have companies simply for the money, right? It's the destination. You want to be able to go somewhere. And the passengers are the employees, and they're excited, not about the fuel in the car. How much fuel do we have? No one gets excited by that. We get excited where we're going. We're going to Alaska. Are we near? And that's the analogy. And when there's a roadblock, if you're only driven by the metrics, then the way we think about money, the way we think about corporate goals is the same way we think about our goal is to drive 200 miles a day. Our goal is to make X amount of money, right? That's how we think about it. Well, what happens if you drive 150 miles? Is that a problem? What happens if there's a roadblock? Do you know what to do? You start freaking out and panicking because you're going to miss your numbers. Where purpose-driven companies that know their destinations in the idealized state, they take detours. And to the outside world, it looks like you're going sideways or slowly, but you know you're just going around. And that's how companies actually look. It's circuitous and messy. And purpose helps us keep focused on the very far distant future, so we know we're going in the right vector, even if somebody can't tell we're going in the right direction. And so people have to understand the purpose of the goals you're setting and how they're contributing to something. And start talking, like we and our P&L, I don't have the word profit on my P&L. It doesn't exist. On my P&L, it says freedom. I damn well want more freedom this month than I had last month, right? Freedom to say no to things I don't want to do. Freedom to give it away. Freedom to take care of my people. I want freedom, because profit means nothing. So I'm trying to contextualize all of these words that have no inherent magic to them. So yeah, think of money like fuel, and fuel drives your purpose. Be purpose-driven and talk about the place you're trying to get to and talk about the world that you imagine. And you damn well better make a lot of fuel to get there, because it's going to be expensive and it's going to take a long time.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much.